Hello and welcome to the channel. My name's Andrew. Today we'll be using Raw to generate some Karplus-Strong synthesis. This basically involves just using noise, white noise, or some sine. I've got a sine wave, or we can use any of the waves because I'll be using drift to generate the sound tones for Raw. And well, have a listen. We'll have a listen for about a minute. You can get an idea of the kind of tones you can generate with Raw and this synthesis method. Then I'll show you how the rack works, and finally, as always, how, if you're interested, you can build this rack for your own music. So we have the rack here, and we have drift. I'll just explain what's going on in drift very quickly. It's basically using one oscillator here to generate our tone. We can change the oscillator shape here. So we have an oscillator. Typically you can use sine for this kind of synthesis, but mainly it's based around noise here. So we have our noise level here, and this is being generated by drift. So this is what drift is doing. It's providing one oscillator with a tone and noise when we need it. So we can close that up. There's nothing else really going on. I've set the frequency a little bit lower here to 12,000 and put some resonance on it. But that's it. It generates the noise. It's then put into Raw here. And with the Karplus-Strong synthesis, we can put an example on here. You can use, I'm just using noise here. This is the tone level controls the oscillator that we talked about in drift. So if I turn that down, we're just hearing the pure noise. We can hear it's generating like a bottle sound almost. And this is achieved by feeding these bursts of sound into a feedback loop effectively. And here's our feedback control here. So we have high levels of feedback which are generated here in Raw, and they then allow us, with certain settings for the ADSR detect, and also for the filter as well, we have to use the filter here on Raw, we can generate these kind of tones. Here we go. If we adjust this filter here, we can play with the brightness of the tone. That's the width and the frequency effects. So you can hear this has an effect on pitch as well here. We can go back to that. We use then Raw as a very good method for this synthesis because it actually allows us, here we'll see, it allows us to track the key we're playing, so it can link the key position, key tracking effectively, to the frequencies here being generated, or the feedback being generated, so that we get at low levels on the keyboard, C0, C1, we'll get a different degree of feedback to what we will higher up the keyboard at C3 or C4. So that's the advantage of using raw. Typically this kind of synthesis is done with delays, but if I show you here, we have a tuner. It does have an effect on the tuning when we play around with this. Everything affects the tuning, and the FM isn't affecting it here at the moment because I'm only using noise. But you can see we're having an effect on the tuning. So the tuner is part of the rack. I've kept that in here because when you're setting up these sounds, sometimes you just have to adjust it a few cents to get it on spot or get it close to something like that. So yeah, so the advantage of raw is that we overcome that problem of using a delay for this, for the high feedback, and we can have easier access to the synthesis method, if you like. Okay, so what do we have in here then? Let's go to something else. Turn this off for a second. It creates all kinds of tones, as you heard in the intro. Typically plucky sounds, a kind of bottle blowing sounds. Usually the sustain is kept off, but I've introduced it on this rack. Not a great deal. I think about 20, because you can hear it gets quite gnarly, but sometimes at low levels it's quite nice. Let's go through the rack here. We can, as I say, we can control the oscillator shape here in drift. You can see this oscillator changing here. We have the octave for drift. We have tone control here, which is basically the shape for whichever oscillator we have. We can vary the shape. As I mentioned before, we have the noise down here, so we have the noise level. If I turn these both off, we have nothing. Noise. And then we have some FM. I've set up the LFO here, which I've shown in some of my previous videos, to function as an FM modulator for the pitch here. So this is coming through here and not modulating the pitch here. So with the tone on, we'll turn off the noise, we can introduce FM. Now you might not hear it always because it depends on many things. If it increases decay, then you should. So I'm also using FM here, where, let's go to a sine wave. Here we have a sine wave. As long as these values are a division of 0.2 of 25, so 0.25, 0.5, then you should be okay. So we can set this to 2 as an example, or 0.75 if you want to stay in tune. So that's what's going on here. Noise is here, and this is affected by this feedback, which is part of raw. So we'll come out of here. So this is this feedback loop here, and also we're in this routing here feedback. So we have some feedback coming in here. We're controlling this. So if I increase the feedback here, you'll see this amount go up. Not a lot. I get up to about 14%, that's it, that's all you need. And then I have here on this side, I have drive. You see here. And then this filter bandwidth, turn that down. Now because we're using noise, there's no effect from octaves or FM or anything. But yeah, so that the bandwidth here, which you see here, allows us to shape our tone when we play with the frequency and the width. And let's reset that to 0, and the decay. So high feedback, some driver, and play with these. We get these on plucky sound. If we shorten the feedback, then we'll have less sustain on the sound. We can, as I mentioned, introduce sustain here. So as I say, using these things, these controls, we can play around and shape the sound, and then of course we can introduce our oscillator to add to this. Again, play with these. So sort of drum sounds. Introduce the FM. Play around, whatever. A lot of experimenting. As I say, it's good to have the tuner, because if we just play a single note, then you'll find you're a few cents off quite often. You can just adjust it here. So I've got a fine tune here. One way I find of actually seeing the tuning, we'll close that for a second, is to put a little bit of sustain on it. Maybe we'll go to something else here. A bit slower. So if you put a bit of sustain on, you can kind of see where you land with your tuning and then push it out or get closer in. Now this type of synthesis typically has a range as you go away from C3, so you can set this up, but if you're on C3 you might find that at C5 the tuning's drifting already, or down on C0, so you can kind of tune it to the range you want the sound to be within. If you're going to be in the lower notes, you might want to tune it down in C1 or C2, get it close as possible, and then play. Okay, but you can create these kind of woody sounds, what's like clarinet sounds, whatever, from this type of cymbal, just from noise and a sine wave. Okay, so let's turn it off for a second. I think we've had enough of that. Let's just have a look. What do we have in the rack? It's basically drift. Then we have we have raw, which is set up very easily. As I say, it's set up to get the feedback from the keys that we play. We'll look at that in the build. And then finally, I'm using a shifter here for the fine tuning here. This is what adjusts the fine tune. Now this is only available in Suite, I believe. I believe raw is only Suite. I'm not sure if it's in standard. Best to check. I don't have it in my head at the moment. Okay, so yeah, let's have a look how it's put together. It's actually quite easy to put together. It's really a case of just experimenting and finding the sounds. That's what takes a little bit of time. But there's some interesting stuff to be had here. Anyway, we'll have a look. You'll need then, to begin with, in Instruments, an instrument rack. You can just drop and drag that in. We'll open it up first. These are the macros here. I've kept my original names. You can right-click here and rename them if you want. Just rename. You can, as I say, use my names or use your own. We'll need all 16, so we'll open those all up. Now we can drop our instruments in. I was using drift simply because it had the noise and oscillator on it. Just my choice. You can use any synth as long as you can generate noise. After drift, we can go into our audio effects and we'll take raw and drop that in here. Then we'll also get this, just move that over a little bit, or close that up so we don't need that. We'll have raw, then we want to have the shifter here. Drop it in the rack, close that. Then we'll also put a tuner in. And finally at the back of the rack, I have a limiter, just in case we get any overbearing tones coming through. So that keep in the rack. Right, so we can set up drift now. That might be the easiest thing to set up. So I didn't do too much. I turned off oscillator 2 here. It would have been nice if I could have used oscillator 2 because you have the detune here. I wouldn't have had to use the shifter. I might have got away with that. But I wanted to have this shape function, so that's the reason I went for oscillator 1. I dropped this down to about 12,000. and set the resonance at 0.4. Then we set up the LFO here for the FM. We put this on 1 to 1. And if we go here and increase this LFO amount to 100%, we'll actually map this, but that would then oscillate or frequency modulate oscillator 1 with these settings. But we will actually take control of this with the mapping here. We'll do that in a second. Okay, so that's drift set up. We can close that. Now we go to raw, and we want to go into this section here on raw and choose here for MIDI feedback, MIDI to feedback note, and we want to choose, I'm using channel 1, so I'll select that. This is Karplus-Strong, so that's the channel I use there. So that connects that to that. Then we want to change our routing here to feedback, and then we will map this. The compressor I left at 25%. There's a bit of mapping we'll have to do in here, but that's okay, we'll come to that. And the shifter as well, there's nothing to do here. That's just mapping as well. In fact, we can start with the mapping on the shifter because that's very easy. We'll just map this fine tune here, map that to that, and then we can close up shifter, we don't need that. Okay, so let's go through very quickly and map everything we need from drift and raw. So back into the mapping, we'll take the oscillator shape and map it here. We will take this shape, and I've called that tone, we'll map that here. Then we have the volume level for oscillator 1, which is the tone level, and the noise level here at the bottom. Then we will need our attack, decay, sustain and release, and then the FM ratio is this ratio here, the LFO, and the LFO level, the FM level is this box down here, what I mentioned earlier. So we'll put those all in there, and then finally just the octave here. I think that's everything for drift. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so we can close up drift now, and we'll concentrate on raw. So we're going to map our drive here to the drive, and also our output to the drive. And what we'll do is we'll balance the two. As we increase drive, we'll drop the output. Then we're going to take the frequency here, and we'll map that to our bandpass filter frequency here. And this one here, the width, we will map to the width. We will also map this in direct here. We'll map this filter here also to our frequency, sorry, our width here, the width here. And also if we click on the feedback here, we'll take this as well and also map that here to our width here. So those two are connected. Then we have the feedback, stay on the feedback, we have the amount here, which goes to our feedback level. And we'll also go into the direct here and take this and also map that to our feedback level. So both of those. And finally, we take the amount of feedback here and map that to our feedback level. So those three are in. And that's it. We've got everything mapped now. All that we need to do is to input the constraints here, the values here, and I'll put them up as a screenshot for you. I recommend you keep your volume off for the channel when you put these in, because there's some quite high feedback levels. Until you've set these values correctly, you can have some quite high feedback. If you accidentally press a key on the keyboard, yeah, you might get a shock. So I would turn off the sound and then put these values in, and then once they're in, everything should be fine, and we can test out the rack. Okay, so once those are in, we can close the mapping, We'll go to one of our snapshots here. You save the rack here with this icon. That'll save it into your user library. That will then be saved in, let's close up, presets, under presets, instruments, open that up, instrument rack, you'll find it in there. You can drop it into any project you want. So we'll come out of there. And then if you want to create, if you get a selection of macro positions you like, you can create a new variation here and then save it. It'll save it in here. You then need to resave the rack, otherwise if they're not saved here they will be lost. So you need to save them here and then save the rack, and then everything's fine. What else is there to say? Yeah, that's just a note on drift. If you find you're not getting the sound you want from the noise, you want a bit more noise, you can just adjust this for up to 20 again, 20 kilohertz. I just dropped it down a little bit. You can play with these values, that's not a problem. If you want a little bit more range with the noise, we can close this now. Is there anything else to mention? Yes, I excluded some of these from macro variation, I think. Let's just go through them quickly. Which one did I exclude? So I excluded the FM ratio. I excluded here the fine tuning. And also the sustain here I excluded as well. And that's it. So if you exclude those ones, then you can randomize away and see if anything comes up. I'll start with a bass first. Let's go, let's do this one here. And yeah, as I say, you can, seems to be working okay. There you go, there's that. Once you get into the high feedback levels, you start to get these. Okay, so, seems to be working. Okay, yeah, the trick with the drive I mentioned before was that, here we go, as you increase the drive here, you're also decreasing the output gain, so that kind of keeps volume levels a little bit under control. Okay, I think that's everything. We can try a random. Try another one. Sometimes you get something you like. Just have to play around. Use the tuner at the back here if you want to get things a little bit fine-tuned. As I mentioned, you have, sometimes with this kind of synthesis, you have a limited range across the keyboard, maybe 2 or 3 octaves, it'll start to drift. But you want to really focus on the octaves you want to use and then tune them in that position, and you should be fine. The limiter is, say, to catch anything nasty coming out the back. Alright, okay, thank you. I think that's everything for today. I hope this video has been useful as always, and take care and see you in the next one.